So the other day I was talking to an individual. He was a real estate owner. He was going to hire us to manage his property for him. And he brought up the question, a great question. Mark, how should I have ownership of this property? Should I just own it in my name individually? Should I set up some type of an ownership entity, maybe an LLC or a corporation? How should I own this thing? Great question. Every real estate investor needs to consider. So there's a couple things you want to keep in mind as you're deciding how to hold your legal ownership entity. The number one most common misnomer is this: well, are there tax implications? Am I going to be taxed differently if I hold a property in my individual name or if I hold it in an LLC? No, you are not. Because for most of us, for the 99% of us, we are pass-through entities, meaning whatever income that property generates, it's going to be taxed at your individual tax rate. Now, I'm not an accountant, I'm not a lawyer, so you want to talk to your accountant, talk to your lawyer to confirm these things. But unless you're owning large commercial properties that are generating a lot of money, it's going to be a pass-through. If you're owning the big stuff, maybe you do want to set that up as a C corporation, and that would be taxed differently. But everything else is typically taxed the same. So there's not any reason to hold your property in a different entity as far as taxes are concerned. Now you may think, well, if that's the case, then why in the world do I want to go through the headache and hassle of setting up an LLC? Why can't I just own it in my own name? One word: protection. The whole purpose and the whole point of a separate legal ownership entity is to protect the property and to protect you, and to protect both of those things separately. See, if you own rental property, you've got vendors, you've got tenants, you've got neighbors. All of these people, as well as many more, represent potential legal liability that could happen on your property. If a vendor's out on your property and they slip and fall, that vendor could sue you. If a tenant's on your property, they slip and fall, they can sue you. Same thing with neighbors. Now, we live in a very litigious world. We know that. This is all assuming, by the way, you already have your insurance in place, right? You want your liability insurance, you want your landlord's policy in place, you want an umbrella policy. If you have not already watched our video on property insurance, hit the pause button right now, go watch that, then come back to here, because this is secondary to have strong insurance on your property. But once you have that insurance, second way to protect is to set this up. So you're protecting the property from these types of instances that could conceivably happen. So let's pretend that tenant is in your property, they slip and fall and the worst happens and they really hurt themselves. And they sue you. They sue you for everything you have. Well, if that property is owned in an LLC, all they can do is go after that property. Now they may get the property, they may get the whole thing, but that's all that is owned by that LLC is that property. So their landlord is 123 LLC, because that's who owns the property. They sue, and let's say they win and they max out the insurance, and your worst case happens and they get some value of the property. They get the property, but they can't touch your personal assets because the property is protected by that umbrella of an LLC. Now keep this in mind as well. An LLC also protects the property from yourself. So by that, here's what I mean. Let's pretend that you own a rental property and you own it in an LLC, and one day you're driving down the road and you're not paying attention and you get in a terrible car wreck and you really hurt someone. And that person you hurt turns around and sues you, and they're going to win. They're going to get everything. They're going to get everything you have. Well, if you own that rental property in a separate LLC, they can't get that rental property because it's not yours. It's owned by the LLC. So the protection of an LLC kind of goes both ways. You're protecting yourself from things that could happen on the property, but you're also protecting the property from things that you could do that may infringe on the property. It's really a double benefit that way of having this in place. Now, there are many different types of legal entities that are out there. LLCs are the most common, a limited liability company. That is the most common. We recommend that for the majority of our investors. If you're in a partnership, you have an LLP, limited liability partnership. In Colorado, they also recognize an LLLP, a limited liability limited partnership. Each of these has unique features and aspects of it. This is where you may want to talk to a tax person, talk to your property management company. But for the majority of individual investors, LLC is where you want to start with. That's the first thing you want to look at. That's how I own my rental properties, in an LLC. Well, what are the costs associated? Very minimal. If you start an LLC, you need to register that with the state of Colorado, which costs you a whopping $10. We can all afford that. You get that registered with the state. If you're going to have an attorney involved for that to draw up that paperwork, they're obviously going to charge you some costs associated with that, but very, very little costs to start up. Now, you will have to file a separate tax return every year for that LLC. That will cost you a little bit of money, but the costs of maintaining this are very, very minimal. Don't let that stop you from putting it in place. So what are our recommendations as it relates to ownership entities? Let me ask you two questions to keep in mind to help you decide. Number one, what is the length of your ownership time? If you have a rental property and your plan is to rent it out for 6 months and then you're going to sell it, or it's going to be a short-term deal, then it may not be worth the headache, the hassle, the cost of setting up a legal ownership entity. It may just be best to keep it in your name and sell it. That's fine. If, however, this is a long-term buy and hold, then you definitely want to put that property into an LLC. Take the time to set up the legal protection if you're holding it for a duration we recommend of 12 months or more, and certainly if you're holding it permanently. The second thing to consider is what is the value of the property and the portfolio. Sometimes we'll get this question, gosh, Mark, I've got 3 properties. Should I have each of them in a separate LLC, or can I put them all into one LLC? That's a great question. Our recommendation as far as the value of the portfolio before you want to set up a second LLC is $5 million. What we mean by that is create your LLC, put properties inside of that LLC. Once the value of that property portfolio, all the properties in there together, total $5 million, now it's time to go get another LLC and start putting it into that one. You say, well, why $5 million? Because you can typically max out your insurance coverage with $5 million. So if you have insurance coverage in place that's going to cap out at $5 million for that LLC, you're safe. You want to do it for $1 million, $2 million, fine. But you don't need to necessarily put every property into different LLCs. That can be very labor intensive, time intensive, and then it does get a little bit costly. If you've got 10 properties and 10 LLCs, that means 10 more tax returns. Now you're getting to be cost prohibitive. So we recommend $3 to $5 million, really 5. Put $5 million into each portfolio before you move it on to another LLC. There's a lot of things to consider. LLCs are difficult. I'm not a tax guy, I'm not an accountant, so do talk to your tax guy, do talk to your accountant. But if you've got questions, we're happy to be your resource. Give us a call at Grace Management. We can give you some thoughts, some recommendations on who to talk to help you get this structured for yourself, to protect your property and be very, very successful with your real estate investing.